Browne. Welcome to this week's edition of MFB News. I hope you're all doing really well, that you've had a fantastic week. Now we've got some really good stuff for you this week. We're going to do our usual roundup of what's been happening with swap rates and lender pricing changes. We're going to touch on inflation because it's 7:05 in the morning and the BBC have just announced the latest inflation data. So we're going to touch on that. We'll go into that in a bit more detail next week and I'll explain to you why shortly. We're going to talk about house prices. Have we turned a corner? Are prices starting to rise? And then finally, we've got some information on new laws that have been announced for all limited companies. So for any of you guys who have limited companies or are thinking about setting up a limited company as an investment vehicle, you're going to need to hear this as well. So some really good content for you this week. Okay, so let's kick things off with swap rates, and yet again, no real movement. So as of 10:30 last night, and it's Wednesday morning, so this is Tuesday evening, 2-year swap rates 4.502, 1 month ago 4.505, so month on month there hasn't really been any change. 1 year ago, for those of you that are interested, 3.858. 5-year swap rates, almost identical story actually. So as of last night, 5-year swaps 3.940, and 1 month ago 3.961, 1 year ago 3.519. So nothing has really moved there, which, as I've mentioned in previous weeks, is not necessarily a bad thing, because the consistency in cost of funds on the capital markets makes it a lot easier for lenders to be able to price mortgage deals, because there is consistency essentially. Now, what has come out today is the inflation data. And it will be interesting to see how the capital markets respond to this over the next few days. And so we'll go into this in more detail next week. But for those of you who haven't seen the news yet, inflation data for February shows that the general pace of general prices rises has slowed, falling to 3.4% in February. And this is down from 4% in January and December. So that's a really good thing. Now, in terms of reporting on this, what they're saying is actually, it's great that prices have come down or inflation has slowed down, but actually what isn't happening is that the cost of goods is coming down. They're actually still increasing, albeit at a slower pace. So it'll be interesting to see how the capital markets do respond to this. However, I think the key message here is that inflation is now at its lowest level since September 2021. So we'll keep you updated on that. Now, in terms of moving on to lender pricing in the last week, it's been more down than up, actually, but not necessarily hugely exciting. So there's been lots of lenders, and I think really what they're doing at the moment is tinkering with rates rather than kind of, anything to read into. Lots of lender rates coming down. Is this, the sign of things to come? We do need the capital markets to respond to the inflation, new swap rates to come down, and then we generally will see lenders start to, reprice because their cost has come down. But what we have seen is lenders, like I say, tinkering with rates. So the first lender who made reductions in the last week was Clydesdale, and they made reductions of up to 0.3%. Now, Clydesdale had increased their pricing a few weeks ago. It was a really heavy increase, actually. I suspect this was a knee-jerk reaction to swap rates rising. Now the market has settled, they feel more confident about where they can put things. They've dropped things down a bit. Clydesdale is a lender, not landlord friendly, which isn't really very good, is it, when I'm talking to people who are basically landlords. The reason you would use Clydesdale is for a vanilla property owned in your personal names, where you have lots of income and not a lot of debt. So essentially what Clydesdale do is they take your income and times it by 8, and that figure limits how much you can have outstanding across all buy-to-lets, your home mortgage, loans, hire purchase, all that kind of stuff. So for those people who are in that situation, this can be a really good option. As an example, actually, the buy-to-let that I own in my own name, that has a mortgage with Clydesdale, because the rental calculation that Clydesdale have is really generous. My property is in Sevenoaks, I own it personally. The rental calculations are tough at the best of times, but then knocking the fact that I'm in the southeast where the yields are not as good as other parts of the country, I would struggle to get the level of mortgage that I needed. Clydesdale, because they run an overall affordability calculation, were able to lend to me. So that's where they kind of come into their own. So it's not going to be for most of you, but actually it can dig some people out of a hole. I think it tends to work really well for those people, particularly, like I say, one buy-to-let was someone who did a let to buy, so rented out their existing property and then went on to buy a new home. And we've seen Zephyr Home Loans make reductions of up to 0.15%. Zephyr are a specialist lender. Their pricing is kind of, it's not great actually, so it's good they've come down by 0.15%. They're still not going to be market leading. That's not really where they sit. Their offering is really proposition based, so criteria led. So yeah, good to see them come down, but I think that's probably as much as we need to say about that one this week. We've seen the Leeds Building Society reduce their rates by 0.2%. The Leeds are an interesting one. They're kind of a very high street lender, a vanilla lender who dabble in the more complex side of things. So very small HMOs, they can do limited companies, but the criteria around limited companies is very, very tight. One of the things they're particularly good on is older borrowers, so no maximum ages on application or maturity of the loan. So they're really, really good at this. So 0.2% reduction from these guys. Coventry have reduced some rates. Kent Reliance have reduced their 80% loan to value rates by 0.5%, so a big step down there. And Precise have done the same thing, all part of the same group of companies. Their 80% rates have come down by 0.2%. And we've seen Foundation Home Loans introduce a new limited edition product. So their 2-year fixed rates now from 5.79 with a 1% fee. Actually, that's not bad in the current market, and notwithstanding the fact that Foundation are a specialist lender, so this would apply to landlords with a large number of properties in the background, so more than 10, and also they can lend to limited companies as well. Now, conversely, the only really significant set of rate increases we've seen this week are from the Mortgage Works. They have increased their limited company rates and their HMO rates, and they have withdrawn free legals on limited company remortgages as well. So that is kind of the roundup from the lenders this week. And I think actually for the next week, because we're going to hopefully see some movements in swap rates, and I could be wrong on this, but I'm really hoping we are because of the inflation news, we may see swap rates start to ease, and then we may see some lenders start to reprice the week after, so going into essentially Easter week. But as always, we'll keep you posted. Now, a very quick bit of criteria change that we've seen in the last week, which comes from our friends at the West Brom. Now, the reason this is particularly important actually is it raises a very topical subject, which I'll come on to in a second. So first of all, the first change they've made, and there's two, they're now able to accept flats which are in a block which is a commercial to residential development. So previously they weren't accepting those. If I'm brutally honest, I don't entirely understand why. I guess it's due to some kind of concern about planning or potentially permitted development, and it could be linked to basically their lack of appetite to live in new build flats. I'm not sure, but actually what they're saying now is that they can accept commercial to residential developments. Now, the other thing that they've said is that they've changed their policy on spray foam insulation, and this is something which does come up actually, particularly as people have been trying to kind of upgrade properties, make them more energy efficient. People are using spray foam as an insulation. Now, the concern with spray foam is that actually it can cause dampness if in some properties, and so lenders don't tend to like spray foam insulation. So what the West Brom are saying is, if there is spray foam insulation, it must have been removed by a specialist and should have had a second independent review before an offer can be made on a property. So what they're saying is, if you come to us with a property and there's spray foam insulation present, we're not going to decline it, but this has to have been removed before we can produce an offer, and it has to have been inspected by an independent kind of person to make sure it's been done properly. Now, like I say, spray foam does come up occasionally in conversation. I think my advice to you would be, if you're thinking about insulating your property, please don't use spray foam because it's not great, and most lenders really dislike it. Now, as always, there's always exceptions to the rules. So if you have a property already with spray foam, which you don't want to remove, we probably would be able to assist you. But if you're thinking about making those kind of very, very important energy efficient changes to properties and trying to insulate it, spray foam is probably something to steer well clear of. Okay, now for those of you who have property in a limited company, or indeed any old limited company, or are thinking about using a limited company for investment going forwards, there's been some key changes that have been announced under the Economic Crime and Corporate Transparency Act. Try saying that after a couple of drinks. Now, basically what they're saying is important changes to UK company law, giving Companies House more power to tackle crime and improve their data, are coming in. And so what I'm going to do for you now is just kind of highlight the key changes, but actually there's lots of information on the Companies House website, and I'll signpost how you can find that in a moment. So the first thing is that Companies House are now going to have, going forwards, more powers to remove suspicious information, which will mean a company register with more reliable data. So they're basically looking to be able to have more power to change the data on their database, which will make the data that is available more reliable. No problem there. All companies will need to provide a registered email address, and this is going to be the correspondence address that they're going to be using to correspond going forwards, and it won't be available in the public register. So essentially you're always going to have to give them an email address they can correspond to you with, but actually don't worry, it's not going to be published. No, some landlords don't want their email addresses being made available, particularly if they have tenants where there's a letting agent involved essentially. So you will be ensured some privacy, but you're going to have to provide an email address. Excuse me. Introduction of a new definition of an appropriate registered office address. So essentially anything sent to this appropriate address by Companies House is expected to reach the person acting on behalf of the company. This means there are going to be, or PO boxes going forwards are no longer going to be allowed, and you can still use an agent's address. So what they're saying is that there has to be an address on their records. The address can't be a PO box address, but it can be, because a lot of people, when they set up companies, they use the address of their accountant. That is still okay as long as it's not a PO box address. But what they're saying is if they write to you at this address, they expect that the person or people who are running the company are going to be picking up that correspondence. So essentially, oh yeah, that's the wrong address, we're not available there, or the person who makes the decisions isn't actually on that address, is no longer going to be a genuine or an acceptable excuse not to have got stuff done. Now what they're saying is the filing processes are being streamlined. Accounts will need to be filed using software, so no more paper accounts, guys. And this is the same for personal tax returns as well. So going forwards, things are going to be moving over to online software, and the software is actually already available, so you can start this transition immediately, but just so you know, that's coming in. And then lastly, anyone setting up, running or controlling a UK company will need to prove their identity. So going forwards, actually, when you go to set up a company, if you're going to be a director, a person of influence, a shareholder, that kind of stuff, you are going to have to prove that you are who you say you are. So this is kind of money laundering stuff now. The other thing which they didn't mention on their helpful overview video is that they're going to be increasing their costs as well. Now, these changes, I mean, broadly, they're pretty straightforward, aren't they? I think it's really important to be aware of them and know that these might be coming in and could impact you depending on the way that you've got the company set up. If you go to changes to companylaw.campaign.gov.uk, there is loads of information which goes into lots of detail for you, so you can go and have a nose around there. So just to remind you, changes to companylaw.campaign.gov.uk. And I just thought it'd be nice to give you some good news, actually. So when I saw an article telling me that house prices are now starting to surge, I couldn't resist but reading it. So essentially Rightmove have said that asking prices have now increased to a 10-month high, stating that asking prices have increased by £5,279 or 1.5%. So this means the average asking price is now £368,118 and represents an annual growth of 1%. Now, Rightmove are attributing this increase in asking prices to buyer demand being 8% higher than the previous year, and the number of sales also increasing by 13% compared to this time last year as well. So it sounds like the purchase market is starting to gain some momentum. Now, one thing they did say, which I found quite interesting, is that the average duration to secure a buyer has now extended to 71 days, which is the longest period of time since 2019. And also that despite stronger prices this year, asking prices are still £4,766 below their peak in May 2023. So I think what I take from this is that actually it could be that things are really starting to kind of hit the bottom and starting to kind of pick back up again. And we know the spring market is always a good time for the housing market, and it could be just this, but also there's a kind of mood change, I think, in the market where people's incomes have, in most cases increased to some extent. Most people had a pay rise. So people are able to kind of keep up with affordability. Interest rates, while they're higher than people would like, they're not going crazy, so people have more certainty. And also because house prices have eased back down a bit, people are kind of eyeing up properties, looking to make a deal. I know I can certainly see in the behaviours of my clients that those people who are planning to increase their portfolio this year are definitely shopping around, because they're sort of thinking that actually by the end of this year, house prices will have kind of really turned a corner. So, and I think probably that is the message for you from this. If you are thinking about buying at the moment, it could be that we're in the kind of like last chance saloon for windows of opportunity before things start to increase again. And that's us for this week. I shall be back next time with lots of amazing information about inflation data. So that's something to look forward to, isn't it? But until then, please do look after yourselves. Have a fantastic week. And as always, you know you can give us a call, 0345 345 6788 or have a look at our website. I shall see you again next Wednesday.